This is the Release and Realization podcast, where we explore emotional freedom and practical manifestation based on the teachings of Lester Levinson and Neville Goddard to help you unlock your inner power and create the life you want. Welcome. In today's episode, David and Anna explore the concept of a state shift and what happens when reality suddenly clicks into place.
What if the reason you can't solve your biggest life problem isn't actually because you aren't trying hard enough?
Right.
But what if it's because you're trying to solve it from an entirely wrong dimension? Just think about that for a second.
It's a heavy thought.
It really is, because we are so completely conditioned to believe that changing our lives requires, heavy machinery. We constantly think about knocking down walls or bringing in the mental bulldozers, pouring new behavioral concrete.
Yeah, it's all about massive, visible effort.
Exactly. You want a better life. Work harder. You want to be happier. Just force yourself to smile more. But today, we are unpacking a concept that claims our entire approach to self-improvement is actually totally backward.
It really is a complete inversion of how we are taught to operate. I mean, we constantly measure our progress by the amount of sweat equity we put into our personal development.
Right, like if it doesn't hurt, it's not working.
Exactly. The cultural default is essentially, well, if you aren't exhausted, you aren't growing. But the material we're looking at today introduces a landscape of transformation that is entirely invisible, incredibly quiet, and yet
infinitely more powerful.
Yes, infinitely more powerful than any forceful effort we could possibly muster.
And this is exactly why we're doing this deep dive, because if you're listening to this, you're likely someone who loves to learn, someone who is constantly seeking ways to, optimize your mindset.
Mm-hmm.
You are probably very familiar with the heavy lifting of self-improvement. I mean, we all are. But we're exploring a translated source text today, originally titled Beilstedt Suveg, that focuses on a theme we're calling the state shift, when reality clicks into place.
It's a fascinating document.
It really is. So, okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today isn't to give you just another life hack or a quick mood booster.
Right.
We are aiming at something much, much deeper.
Right, and we really need to establish that core premise immediately. The central argument here is that as human beings, we constantly, almost habitually, confuse fleeting emotional states with profound structural shifts in consciousness.
We mix up the daily weather with the underlying climate.
That's a great way to put it. To understand the phenomenon of reality clicking into place, we have to recognize that we are not talking about how to feel a little more energetic on a Tuesday afternoon.
Right.
We're talking about a fundamental reorganization of the very foundation from which you perceive your entire life.
Which means we first have to totally separate the wave from the baseline. This text highlights the specific language people naturally use when a genuine shift happens. You hear people say things like, something just clicked inside me.
Or suddenly everything became clear.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the most fascinating descriptions from the text is, I was no longer looking at it from the same place. It's such a, it's a very spatial, physical way to describe an internal, invisible event.
Well, it's spatial because it is a structural change. What's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism at play. I mean, an emotion, say, a sudden burst of joy or a wave of anger.
Right.
It's a biochemical spike. It changes your state temporarily, it crests, it falls, and crucially, it is reactionary. It will eventually return to baseline.
Like a sugar rush.
Exactly like a sugar rush.
Yeah.
A state of consciousness, however, actually is the baseline. When a state shift occurs, it isn't a spike in the old system. It is the establishment of an entirely new operating system.
It's the difference between a thunderstorm and a literal change in season.
Yes.
Like an emotion is the thunderstorm. It rolls in, it makes a ton of noise, gets everything wet, and rolls out. You can have a sunny day in the middle of winter, but that doesn't mean it's suddenly summer. The baseline is still winter.
Precisely.
But I want to play devil's advocate here for a second, because the lived experience of being a human is really messy. When I get a promotion, or, I fall in love, or I just have a brilliant cup of coffee after a really great night's sleep, my brain absolutely tricks me.
Oh, of course it does.
It says, this is it. I have figured life out. I will never, ever be anxious again. So how do we actually practically distinguish this deep structural click from simply waking up on the right side of the bed?
It's the perfect question, because the ego loves to claim victory over a temporary high. The diagnostic marker we have to look for is subtle, but it's decisive.
Okay.
When a true stage shift happens, absolutely nothing has to visibly change on the outside. But the internal geometry of how you relate to the outside world becomes entirely different.
The internal geometry.
Right. Think about a mood as putting a colored filter over a camera lens. It changes the hue of the picture temporarily. But a consciousness shift doesn't put a filter on the lens. It physically picks up the tripod and moves the camera to an entirely different room with a completely different vantage point.
Oh, wow. So if I'm just in a good mood, the old problems are actually still sitting right there in the room with me. I might just feel temporarily energetic enough to ignore them, or maybe I feel strong enough to fight them today. But the moment that caffeine wears off, or the initial excitement of the new job fades.
The problem is exactly as heavy and terrifying as it was yesterday.
Yeah. The baseline hasn't changed. And this points to a really tragic reality about how we live. We spend our entire lives, and frankly our entire economy, just chasing the waves.
We really do.
We buy things, we change jobs, we end relationships and start new ones, all just to generate a specific emotional spike. We hope that if we just stack enough good waves together without any gaps, it will somehow equal a good life.
It's exhausting.
We are frantically trying to change the weather through sheer force of will, entirely ignoring the deeper work of allowing our baseline climate to actually shift.
Which is, yeah, it's like trying to hold back the tide with a broom.
Exactly. And this brings up a really practical question. If chasing the wave is the wrong approach, how do I know if I've actually achieved a new baseline? Like, how do I know I've moved the camera tripod?
Well, the most reliable test is to look directly at the exact problem that used to cause you immense suffering.
And this leads us to one of the most compelling, almost mind-bending concepts we're going to explore today. The text talks about the idea of the weightless question.
Yes.
So I want you to think about a massive problem in your life right now. Maybe it's a brutal, ongoing conflict with a family member, or a career dead end that has literally been keeping you awake at 3 a.m. for months.
We all have one.
We all do. The proposition here is that you can recall or experience a moment when that exact question suddenly loses its weight without the external situation changing at all.
And we really need to unpack the how of that. How does a problem lose its weight if the facts of the problem haven't changed?
Right.
The situation remains physically identically the same. The bank account hasn't grown. The family member hasn't apologized. Yet, the heavy, suffocating weight of the problem completely vanishes.
It reminds me exactly of those Magic Eye 3D puzzles.
Oh, the posters.
Yeah, if you remember those posters from the 90s in the mall, you stare at this page, and it just looks like chaotic, frustrating neon static.
Just a mess of colors.
Exactly. You stare, you strain your eyes, you literally get a headache trying to force the hidden image to appear. That straining is the old state of consciousness. You are trying to solve the problem by actively fighting the static.
Right.
But then suddenly your eyes just defocus, the muscles relax in just the right way, and click. The hidden 3D image of the dolphin suddenly pops out.
I'm glad you brought up that analogy because it perfectly illustrates the neurological and psychological shift that's occurring.
How so?
Well, when you are staring at the Magic Eye puzzle and straining, your brain is trying to process the visual information using its standard, localized, detail-oriented mechanisms.
Just trying to force it.
Yes, it is trying to find a pattern by sheer force of concentration. That is exactly the ego trying to solve a life problem. It uses friction. But the image only reveals itself when you surrender that specific type of focus. When your eyes relax, your brain shifts to a different processing pathway. It takes in the entire field of depth at once. The ink on the page never moved.
Not a single pixel changed.
Right. Not a single pixel changed, but your internal mechanism for processing reality shifted.
That's incredible. The chaos on the page is exactly the same, but your processing of it fundamentally shifted, and suddenly the chaos makes perfect sense. The weight of the confusion is just gone.
Exactly.
And if we apply this to real life, it explains so much of our daily anxiety. We spend our lives staring at the static of our problems, trying to basically redraw the poster with a marker.
That's exactly what we do.
We think, oh, if I can just manipulate my boss into liking me, or if I can just force my partner to understand my point of view, the picture will make sense.
We're trying to alter the external facts to relieve an internal pressure. But the relief we are desperately seeking only permanently arrives when the inner state changes.
When the baseline shifts.
Yes. When that baseline shifts, it neutralizes the weight of the external problem instantly. The problem itself might still require physical action. You might still need to leave the job or have a difficult conversation. But the suffocating existential dread attached to it evaporates.
Right, because you're acting from a place of clarity rather than a place of panic.
Exactly.
So I want to ask you, listening to this right now, mentally scan your life. What is the heavy question you are currently carrying? What is the problem you are staring at, trying to force an answer to?
Just hold that in your mind.
Yeah, hold it there. What if the solution isn't another strategy or another late-night planning session or another argument? What if the actual solution is an inner shift in how you are holding the question itself?
It's a radical proposition, really, because it completely inverts our locus of control. We are deeply conditioned to believe that cause and effect flows from the outside in.
Yes. And here's where it gets really interesting, because this completely defies everything society teaches us about achievement and manifestation.
It does.
We are taught event happens, then state shifts. Everything changed when I moved to a new city. I will finally feel peaceful when I hit that financial milestone. It's just cause and effect.
But at what the text calls the level of creation, this order is totally reversed. The event does not create the state shift. The shift in consciousness makes the new event possible.
Wait, hold on. I have to push back on this.
Go ahead.
Because this sounds a lot like magical thinking if we aren't careful. Are we really saying that the external win, the big life change, only happens after we have quietly accepted an inner yes?
Yes.
That I have to feel the financial security before the money arrives without any proof from the outside world? Because, my landlord wants rent, not a state shift.
It's a vital distinction to make, and I'm glad you brought up the landlord. We aren't talking about delusional positivity where you pretend you have money you don't have.
Right.
We're talking about the energetic baseline for which you operate. Let's look at the mechanics of this. When we operate at the surface level, we are entirely reactive. We wait for permission from our environment to feel a certain way.
Give me an example.
Well, if the bank account looks good, my nervous system has permission to feel secure. Or, if my boss praises me, my ego has permission to feel valued.
Oh, I see. We hold our own state of consciousness hostage.
Exactly.
We ransom it against external circumstances that we often can't even control.
We do. And because we are in a constant state of ransom, our actions are driven by desperation and lack. If you are desperately trying to get a promotion because you feel fundamentally unworthy without it, your boss feels that desperation.
Your colleagues feel that friction.
Right. The environment simply reflects your state of lack. But when your internal state shifts to a quiet certainty, when you no longer need the promotion to validate your existence, your behavior changes organically.
You become less defensive.
Yes. More collaborative, more creative. The environment is actually waiting for your state of consciousness to shift before new events can materialize, because your new state produces entirely different actions and interactions. The external world cannot reflect a reality that your internal state hasn't already assumed.
I see. Okay, so the shift makes the new event possible because you are fundamentally showing up as a different person.
Precisely.
But this begs the question, what does that shift actually look like? Because, let's be honest, society loves a montage. We love the dramatic movie scene where the protagonist stands in the rain, screams at the sky, has a massive breakdown, and suddenly their whole life changes.
We want the lightning bolt. We want the fireworks.
Yeah.
But a genuine structural shift is rarely dramatic.
Right.
It is often described in the source material simply as a resistance that dissolves. It is an inner yes.
A resistance that dissolves. That implies we were the ones holding the tension the whole time.
We are.
It's just you sitting quietly on a Tuesday morning, drinking your coffee, and you just stop fighting the reality of your situation. You just drop the rope in the tug of war. But why do we hold the rope so tightly in the first place?
We hold the rope because the ego equates control with survival. The ego believes that if it stops worrying, if it stops fighting, if it drops the rope, it will die. Or at least the identity that is built around the problem will die.
Right.
So the quiet certainty we were talking about isn't a boastful confidence. It doesn't mean you know exactly how everything is going to work out. It just means the nervous system finally realizes that dropping the rope isn't a death sentence. The frantic questioning stops.
But if it's so quiet, if there are no fireworks and no lightning bolts, how do we even know it's happening?
That's the trick.
If I'm just sitting there and a resistance dissolves, how do I know I didn't just space out for a minute?
This is where we have to look at the deeply physical, biological markers of the shift. Because the mind can absolutely lie to you, but the nervous system cannot.
Okay, what does the nervous system do?
When a genuine inner shift occurs around an issue, the physical tone of the body literally changes. The shoulders soften. The gaze becomes gentler. the inner space of the chest or the gut opens up.
Wait, let me stop you there, because the wellness industry is a multi-billion-dollar machine built on exactly this.
Oh, absolutely.
If softening my shoulders is the sign of a state shift, can I just hack the system? If I do deep breathing exercises or go to a sound bath or practice progressive muscle relaxation, will that cause the state shift?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of our physiology, it explains why so many people get incredibly frustrated with meditation or somatic therapies.
Because they don't work.
Because they use them as tools of force. The physical change we are talking about is a signal, not a consequence of effort. You cannot reverse engineer a state of consciousness by forcefully manipulating the physical symptoms.
So it's the concept of the body as a dashboard, not a steering wheel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unpack that for a second.
Well, think about driving a car. The dashboard tells you what is happening under the hood. The temperature gauge goes into the red if the engine is overheating.
Right.
Now, if you want to fix the overheating engine, you don't take an ice pack and tape it to the plastic dashboard gauge. That would be insane.
It wouldn't do anything to the engine.
Exactly. You don't use the dashboard to steer or fix the car. It just reports the data. But that is exactly what we do with our bodies.
Yes, we do.
We feel the existential anxiety of our lives. Our shoulders are up by our ears. Our stomachs are in knots. And so we go get a massage to force the shoulders down, or we do a breathing technique to force the heart rate down. We're putting an ice pack on the temperature gauge, hoping it will fix the engine.
Which provides temporary relief, perhaps.
Yeah.
But the engine is still on fire. The baseline hasn't shifted. When the engine, the state of consciousness, actually cools down, the needle on the dashboard naturally drops.
Oh, I see.
The shoulders naturally soften. You don't have to force them down. They fall because the invisible psychological tension holding them up has evaporated.
Let's talk about the gaze, because that's a very specific physical marker mentioned in the text. Why does the gaze become gentler?
It comes down to polyvagal theory and our evolutionary biology. When an organism is in a state of threat, which is exactly what the old state of striving and struggling is, the sympathetic nervous system engages.
The fight or flight response.
Exactly. And what happens to the eyes? The pupils dilate and the gaze narrows. It becomes hard, focused, predatory, or paranoid. You get literal tunnel vision because your brain is trying to isolate the threat to survive. You're trying to control all the variables. You are staring intensely at that magic eye puzzle.
You are scanning the environment for the tiger. Or, I guess in modern terms, you are scanning your emails for the passive-aggressive tone from your coworker.
Right. But when the inner state shifts to that quiet certainty, the nervous system receives a profound signal of safety. The threat has neutralized at the baseline level. And organically, without any conscious effort, the peripheral vision opens back up. The micromuscles around the eyes relax. The gaze becomes gentler because it can afford to take in the whole room.
It isn't a technique you practice in front of a mirror.
No, it is the biological reflection of a structural shift in consciousness.
And that feeling of the inner space opening, it's that sensation in your chest where it feels like you've been subconsciously holding your breath for a decade, and suddenly you just exhale.
Yes.
The tension was the physical manifestation of the old state resisting reality. The old state is a clenched fist. The new state is an open hand.
And if you think about the physics of that, an open hand requires zero effort to maintain. A clenched fist takes constant draining energy.
Which transitions us perfectly. If the body's physical tension drops naturally because the perceived threat is gone, what happens to all that mental and emotional ambition we were using to fight the threat? Where does that energy go?
It vanishes. Which brings us to one of the most liberating yet terrifying aspects of a state shift. The text calls it the death of striving.
The death of striving.
According to the mechanics of this shift, effort loses its central role in your life. What once felt like something you had to constantly do becomes natural, or in many cases, entirely unnecessary.
But society terrifies us into thinking that if we stop striving, we just turn into couch potatoes. We think we'll just give up and our lives will completely fall apart.
And that is a fundamental misunderstanding of the two states. The old state is characterized by striving, friction, and wanting to prove. The new state doesn't mean you stop acting. It means the state carries you. It simply knows.
I want to paint a picture here because the difference between the old state and the new state is exactly like the difference between furiously treading water and floating.
Okay, let's explore that.
Imagine you are dropped in the middle of the ocean. The old state of consciousness is utterly convinced that the water is a hostile entity trying to drown you. So what do? You tread water. You kick your legs, you thrash your arms, you keep your chin up, gasping for air.
You're fighting the environment.
Exactly. You are exerting massive, exhausting effort just to survive. And the ego looks at all this thrashing and says, look how hard I'm working. Look at my effort. I am a hard worker. I am saving my own life. That is striving. That is wanting to prove to the ocean and to yourself that you deserve to live.
It's an existence defined entirely by friction.
Yeah.
And it is exhausting.
But then the state shift happens. The new state of consciousness is the realization that the water is actually dense salt water. It is naturally buoyant. The environment isn't hostile. It's supportive.
Right.
If you just lay your head back and spread your arms, the water will literally hold you up. You don't have to fight it. The water carries you. The frantic effort to survive is replaced by the natural carrying capacity of the environment. You stop thrashing.
Yes.
Now, from the outside, someone might look at you and say, oh, no, they gave up. They stopped kicking. They lost their ambition. But you didn't give up at all. You just shifted your state of consciousness to align with the actual physics of reality. You went from striving to floating.
That analogy perfectly isolates the difference between proving and knowing. When you are treading water, you are proving. You are proving your worth through suffering. And proving always requires an audience.
Oh, that's so true.
You need your boss to see you working late. You need your partner to see how much you sacrifice. Even if the audience is just your own internalized critical voice, you need validation that your thrashing is justified.
Yes. I suffered, therefore I deserve the reward.
But knowing is completely self-contained. When you are floating, you don't need to prove to anyone that you are floating. You just know it. The environment is carrying you. Giving up is rooted in despair. It is saying, I can't tread water anymore, so I will sink and die.
Right.
The new state is rooted in effortless presence. It is saying, I don't need to tread water because I am supported.
Think about the areas in your life right now where you are constantly trying to prove your worth. Where are you constantly trying to force a result through sheer friction?
It's a tough question to ask yourself.
It is. Are you working 80 hours a week, not because the actual output requires it, but because you need to prove to your industry that you are indispensable? Are you constantly starting arguments in your relationship just to force your partner to validate your feelings? What would it physically feel like in your body if that effort was suddenly unnecessary, if you realized you could just lay back and float?
The profound realization for anyone on this path is that the very thing you are desperately trying to achieve through friction might actually be immediately available to you through buoyancy.
But, and this is a massive warning sign on the road, if we are expecting this transition from striving to floating to feel like a giant adrenaline rush, we are going to be deeply disappointed.
Oh, completely.
In fact, we might achieve the state shift and immediately discard it because it doesn't feel the way society told us it should feel.
This brings us to the myth of euphoria. We have to shatter the expectation that a profound spiritual or psychological shift equals ecstasy. Very often, the click does not feel like an emotional high.
It's not a party.
No, it does not feel like winning the lottery or front row tickets to a concert. It feels more like, and this is a very specific word from the text, arriving.
Arriving, like walking through your front door and taking your heavy boots off after a grueling 2-week business trip. It's not a party. It's just a profound, quiet relief.
Exactly. It is stable. It is almost overwhelmingly self-evident. But because of our cultural conditioning, millions of people misunderstand this moment. They expect the shift to bring perpetual euphoria.
Sometimes it does bring a brief wave of joy, but often, as you look deeper, everything simply becomes more sober, simpler, and quieter.
Yeah.
It's like an image finally coming into focus. When you adjust the lens on a camera, the picture doesn't become louder. It just becomes clearer. So what does this all mean for us? I think it points to a massive, unrecognized addiction we all share.
Which is?
We are addicted to highs. We want the dopamine spike. We equate intensity with truth. If my heart isn't pounding out of my chest, if I'm not crying tears of profound joy, it must not be a real breakthrough.
It is the tragedy of the modern seeker. We are so conditioned by the dopamine loops of social media, by entertainment, by the gamification of everything, that we evaluate our personal growth by the exact same metrics.
We want a prize.
We literally want a notification bell to ring in our heads when we achieve a state shift. We want the confetti to fall from the ceiling.
Congratulations, you have leveled up your consciousness. Here are 500 spiritual points.
But the reality of true inner reorganization is sober. And soberness is a word the self-help industry absolutely hates.
I hate it.
It does not sell tickets to a $5,000 weekend seminar. You can't market sober clarity the way you can market unleash your ultimate power.
Think about adjusting that camera lens or a pair of binoculars.
Oh.
When the image is blurry, you are constantly fiddling with the dial. You are frustrated. You are in a state of seeking.
Right.
When it finally snaps into focus, the image doesn't suddenly start screaming at you. It doesn't explode with neon lights. It just becomes undeniably, quietly clear. Clarity isn't loud. It is precise.
And this makes me wonder, how many people actually do the deep inner work? They achieve a profound state shift. Their baseline moves to a place of peace.
But they miss it.
Yes, but because they don't feel euphoric, because they don't feel like they just drank a gallon of espresso, they assume they failed. So what do?
They go back to chasing the wave.
They discard the quiet, stable clarity, and they go right back to chasing the noisy, chaotic waves of emotion. They go find another problem to solve just to feel the friction again.
Because what happens to a high, it inevitably crashes. What goes up must come down. The pendulum swings back. But a new baseline doesn't crash. It is the new ground floor.
Exactly.
And this quietness, this soberness, isn't just an emotional feeling. It profoundly impacts the literal, measurable mechanics of the thoughts bouncing around inside our heads. We are moving from the body right up into the control room.
Yes, the inner dialogue. This is where the shift becomes incredibly tangible. The nature of your internal monologue changes. But crucially, it isn't because you suddenly become a fountain of toxic positivity. It is because there are simply fewer compulsive thoughts.
Now, I have to push back here on behalf of every single personal development book written in the last 50 years.
Fair enough.
We are constantly drilled with the idea that we need to practice positive affirmations to change our lives. We are told to look in the mirror and say, I am wealthy, I am healthy, I am confident.
Yes, the mantra approach.
We are taught that the mind is a battlefield, and we have to replace every negative thought soldier with a positive thought soldier. But what we're discussing today throws that entirely out the window. It's not about replacing the negative content with positive content. It's about having fewer thoughts overall.
This raises an important question about how we fundamentally manage our own minds. If we look at the psychological exhaustion of modern life, the traditional advice of fighting negative thoughts with positive thoughts is just another form of treading water.
It's exhausting.
It is exhausting. You're fighting content with content.
It's treating the symptom, but completely ignoring the disease.
Exactly. Imagine you have a thought that says, I'm going to fail this presentation and get fired. The traditional approach is to rush in with a thought that says, no, I am a winner. I am prepared.
Right.
Now you have two thoughts violently fighting in your head, creating friction, demanding immense cognitive energy. You are in a boxing ring with your own brain. You are still completely trapped at the level of the mind's compulsive chattering.
But the alternative is what the text calls the observer state. Stepping back into the observer state means you realize you are not the boxer in the ring. You are the arena itself. You hold the space for the fight to happen, but you realize you are not the fighters.
Let's ground this. What does it actually mean to hold space for a thought without fighting it?
It's like standing on a platform at a really busy train station. The trains constantly arriving and departing are your thoughts. In the old state of consciousness, the compulsive state, a train pulls up. The destination sign on the front says, anxiety about tomorrow's mortgage payment.
A popular train.
Oh, very popular. And what do? You feel completely physically compelled to board that train. You get on, the doors close, and you ride that anxiety train for miles down the track, exploring every terrible scenario until you realize you're exhausted, your heart is pounding, and you don't want to be in this mental neighborhood anymore.
And the positive thinking approach would just be trying to jump out the window of the moving anxiety train and try to tuck and roll onto a speeding I am a money magnet train.
Exactly. You are still frantically jumping between moving trains. But the observer state, the state of fewer compulsive thoughts, is realizing that you are just a passenger standing on the platform.
You don't have to board.
You don't have to board any of the trains. You can just stand there. You watch the anxiety train pull in. You acknowledge it. Ah, there is the anxiety train about the mortgage. It has arrived. You don't fight the train.
Right.
You don't try to blow the train up with positive affirmations. You just hold your space on the platform. You observe the anxiety without identifying as the anxiety. And eventually, because you didn't board it and give it your energetic fuel, the doors close and the train simply rolls away on its own.
That is the mechanical essence of holding space. The thinking relaxes because the inner compulsion to engage with every single mental event has dissolved. The attention steadies. You are no longer being repeatedly kidnapped by your own mental content.
And when you are standing calmly on that platform, when you aren't frantically riding trains to nowhere, you naturally start to view your future, your goals, and your reality in a completely different way.
Yes, you do.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most profound point we need to unpack today: the source state and the physics of allowing.
This is where we tie everything together. The new baseline, the quiet certainty, the death of striving, and the observer state. All of these converge to alter how reality is actually created or manifested in your life.
There are two incredibly distinct questions that illustrate this shift perfectly. Think about a big goal you have. In the old state of consciousness, the ego looks at that desire and frantically asks, how will this become reality?
Right, the obsession with the how.
But after the click, after the state shift, the question naturally transforms. You look at the exact same goal, but the internal dialogue is interesting to see how this unfolds.
The psychological and linguistic shift there is massive.
Yeah.
Let's look at the first question. How will this become reality? That question is dripping with anxiety.
Oh, absolutely.
It is steeped in the illusion of control. It implies a heavy burden. That if I, my tiny little ego, don't figure out the exact mechanics, the exact timeline, the precise how, then the machinery of the universe will grind to a halt and I will fail.
That's terrifying.
It is. It is rooted entirely in lack. It screams, I don't have this, I am empty without it, and I must force it into existence.
It's the clenched fist again. It's treading water. But then look at the second phrase. Interesting to see how this unfolds. This isn't passive. It's not sitting on the couch eating junk food waiting for $1 million to fall through the ceiling.
Not at all.
It is what the text calls the source state of consciousness.
Interesting to see how this unfolds implies a deep structural trust in the environment. It implies an absolute absence of lack. Think about it. You do not say, interesting to see how this unfolds, unless you already deeply structurally know that it is going to unfold.
Wow. Yes.
You have dropped the crushing burden of orchestrating the how. You are no longer micromanaging reality. Creation or external change actually accelerates through this shift in consciousness, not through force.
Because external change so often appears only after you stop tightening around it inside. Reorganization follows naturally, but it refuses to operate on a fixed schedule.
That phrase, tightening around it, that is the energetic bottleneck of our lives.
How so?
When you tighten around a desire, whether it's a desperate desire for a romantic partner, a burning need for a career milestone, or even just a deep wish for physical healing, you are essentially strangling the possibility of it arriving.
Because you're cutting off the flow.
You are broadcasting to the environment, I lack this so deeply that I must control every variable of its arrival. And the environment, which we established is a mirror of your baseline state, simply reflects that tension and lack right back to you.
Letting go of that tight grip, letting go of the fixed schedules is so incredibly difficult for us. I mean, modern society runs exclusively on timelines.
We love a timeline.
We have 5-year plans, quarterly goals, annual performance reviews, biological clocks. We're taught that if we don't force reality onto a spreadsheet schedule, we are completely failing. But natural creation, true external reorganization, operates on its own rhythm.
It does. When you shift to interested to see how this unfolds, you align with that natural rhythm.
Yeah.
You are still taking action, but the action is inspired by curiosity rather than driven by terror.
So, once again, let's bring this right back to you, the listener. What is the thing in your life right now that you are tightening around? What is the goal, the relationship, the persistent problem that has your stomach in knots because you are obsessing over exactly how and when it will be resolved?
Think about what it would feel like to let that go.
Yeah, what would it physically feel like in your body right now to release that tight, suffocating grip? To step back onto the train platform, let the anxiety train roll by, and replace the panic of how will this happen with the calm, quiet curiosity of interesting to see how this unfolds.
That is the ultimate test of the state shift. If you can look at your biggest problem, say that phrase, and genuinely feel the quiet, sober certainty behind it, you have successfully moved the camera. You have reached the new baseline.
This has been an incredibly deep, paradigm-shifting journey today. Let's sort of summarize the landscape we've just traversed.
Good idea.
We started by drawing a hard line between fleeting emotional weather, the dopamine moods that spike and crash, and the structural climate change of a true state shift. We looked at the magic eye puzzle of our deepest problems, realizing that permanent relief comes not from frantically redrawing the picture, but from shifting the inner lens so the problem loses its existential weight.
We reversed the entire societal model of cause and effect. We dismantled the idea that we must achieve to feel, understanding instead that the environment is waiting for our consciousness to shift from lack to certainty before it can reflect new events back to us.
We learned to read the dashboard of our own biology, the softened shoulders, the gentler, wider gaze, not as mechanical techniques to force a mental change, but as biological proof that the inner grip of the ego has already dissolved. We traded the exhausting, friction-filled thrashing of proving for the effortless, buoyant carrying capacity of knowing.
We stripped away the dangerous, culturally ingrained myth of euphoria, learning to value the sober, quiet, stable clarity of an image finally snapping into focus, rather than chasing the unstable high.
We stepped onto the train platform as the observer, realizing we no longer have to compulsively board every anxious thought that rolls through the station. And finally, we arrived at the source state, trading the anxious, controlling how, for the powerful, curious allowing of interesting to see how this unfolds, letting reality reorganize itself naturally.
It is a profound framework for ceasing the internal war.
It truly is. To you, the learner, the seeker listening to this right now, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Our mission today was to give you the vocabulary and the mechanical framework for an inner phenomenon that can genuinely alter the trajectory of your life. My greatest hope is that you experience a few profound, quiet, weightless clicks of your own today.
Before we wrap up, there is one final, almost dangerous paradox I want to leave the listener with to mull over.
Okay.
At the very end of the source material where we're working from, there's a subtle tease for a future exploration. It mentions contrasting a controlling state of consciousness with a permissive, space-holding state.
Which feels like a really natural evolution of what we've just discussed.
It is, and it prompts a very provocative question. We've established today that external reality only fundamentally reorganizes after you stop trying to forcefully control it. The shift happens when the resistance dissolves, when you drop the rope.
Right. The transition from the clenched fist to the open hand.
So if that is mechanically true, what if the very act of actively trying to force a state shift, like reading all the books, listening to all the deep dives, fiercely meditating for hours to try and make the click happen, tracking your spiritual progress on a spreadsheet, what if all that intense spiritual striving is actually just the ultimate manifestation of the controlling state?
Oh, wow. So the ego just dressed itself up in spiritual clothing.
Precisely. What if the only way to genuinely achieve this effortless, floating shift is to completely, utterly surrender the desire to control whether it happens at all?
We are right back at the construction site. You can't use a bulldozer to force the weather to change. You can't force yourself to float by swimming harder.
You just have to step outside, drop your tools, and feel the season turning.
Interesting to see how that unfolds for all of us. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the conversation, please consider subscribing to the channel. For more in-depth and advanced content, you're welcome to join us on Patreon. We'll be back next week with the continuation of this topic.